Well, virtual learning, of course, is hard on its own, but how do we manage our expectations and also manage success at the same time? Education Ambassador DrLiz Matheis is joining us now with more. DrLiz, thanks for being with us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So it's hard to separate academics from everything else the kids are dealing with, but as parents, obviously we still want our kids to do well in school. How do we find that balance?
I think finding that balance is a great idea in theory, but I think as it relates to right now, the goal is really to create as much of a plan and be flexible with it. And for us as parents to be really compassionate with ourselves and to have realistic expectations day by day, because I think we can be really hard on ourselves, and we have a lot of balls to juggle right now in terms of our children's education, our own jobs, and everybody's well-being mentally and emotionally.
It is report card time. What's the conversation we should be having with our kids when we're discussing their grades right now?
You know, I'm thinking about it first as a mom, right? And I know I've been checking my children's grades online because there's that grade portal and so forth. And, you know, I try to monitor it throughout and see how they're doing and really encourage them to do their best to reach out to their teachers. In the end, when the grade report cards come out, I don't think I'm going to give too much credence to the grades because I think, as we all know, there's a lot of flexibility in the grading and there's a lot of just helping the children out. And so I'm not saying the grades aren't valid. I think as a parent, I'm just not going to put a ton of pressure on my children to manage really, really good grades because at this point, it's hard. They're really trying to balance a lot of the social pressures and the emotional pressures and the academic pressures. And I have one in high school, I have one in middle school, and one in elementary school. They're just trying to adjust to being in those new grades. So for me to put additional pressure, I don't know what that's really going to achieve.
So obviously with this constant state of flux that we're in and knowing that on any given day, schools could be shifting plans because of a positive COVID test, it's this type of stress that kids have never experienced before in their lives. How do we manage that stress of the world right now?
So I work with a lot of anxious children. And one thing that we have to manage when you have an anxious child is that when to tell them and when not to, right? So telling a child that you may be home for the next 2 weeks because somebody might have the virus can put them in a state of anticipation. So I've seen children waking up every day and saying, is today the day? Is today the day? And so you really have to balance that and say, is it really a good idea for me to tell them in advance versus do I tell them when it happens? And then we deal with the emotional impact of that in the moment. So for me, I tend to prefer to tell children as it happens and to really discuss it and open the conversation to, so now we're going to be home for maybe 2-3 days or 2 weeks, whatever it is. How do you think we can now work this? And to just keep the conversation going back and forth, answer any questions they may have, because then, of course, for a lot of our anxious children, the next question is, well, am I going to get the virus?
Right.
You know, and so our kids need a lot of reassurance right now, probably more than they ever have, just given the circumstances.
Now, we as parents are juggling a lot, and how do we deal with our own stresses and anxieties and not project them onto our own children?
Now, our children feel our emotions and our fear, but it's important that you talk about it. So when you are feeling stressed, to tell your child, I'm feeling stressed today, and so forgive me if I'm being short-tempered, you know, and to have that conversation because you're also role modeling how to express that fear, to express that frustration. And it's hard because we get lost in the pressures, like you said, the pressure cooker in my head of I need to make dinner, I need to make sure that one logged on, this one turned in this assignment, this one's taking up their makeup test, and I need to make sure I log on and get my work done. And so it's okay to talk about that as parents and to just say, this is hard. It's going to take a lot of effort on all our ends. And are you feeling stressed? How are you feeling? To just do that check-in and keep an open conversation going. So that our children feel comfortable coming to us.
How do we find the balance between being honest with them and also letting them still be kids?
So for me, my go-to is always answer the question that the child asked. Don't answer questions that they didn't ask and don't give too much information. So if you have a young one, a one-sentence answer is more than enough. If you have an older child, you may give them a piece and then just say, do you have any more questions? And again, answer what they're asking and curious about as opposed to telling them so much that it now becomes overwhelming. So I'm not a big fan of turning on the news and letting children be in tune with all the different headlines that are going on, because for our children it is overwhelming to hear that, and they get scared, they ruminate over it, and then it just becomes a part of their list of worries if you have a child who just has a list of worries.
Thanks, Dr. Liz, for joining us as always. Well, schools around the Garden State are teaching life-saving lessons, and we'll give you an inside look at Fire Safety Week.